So a couple of months ago, I got this guitar. It's an Epiphone, but not like a regular one, or at least the regular ones that I've been used to. This one in particular is part of a series called the Inspired by Gibson Custom that they actually dropped a couple of years ago. Now this really excited me, not because I thought this was going to be like the best Les Paul I've ever played or my new #1, but I knew that at this moment, this was going to be about as good of an Epiphone Les Paul as I had ever played. I tried the 355 version and absolutely loved it, played it so much, and I thought to myself, could the Les Paul in the Inspired by Gibson Custom series do the same exact thing? So when the guitar finally arrived and I unboxed it, all of a sudden I had this idea where I would push this guitar to its absolute limits in seeing how it would actually stack up against its older brother. And I had this whole entire plan in mind because a couple of years ago, my friend Andrew, he actually let me borrow his Les Paul Standard to check it out and also see just how much of a step up it was since I had only really spent a lot of time playing the tribute. So I decided that I was going to call him up and see if we could make that happen again, but this time, just a little bit different. Instead of me borrowing his Standard, what if this time I brought him my Epiphone and we were able to play them in real time, A/B them, and because I know we have drastically different takes on guitars, I was really able to see something not only from my own perspective, what I thought was better, but from his, like an engineer's perspective. So the day finally arrives, I pack up my stuff and head over to his place, and before we even begin, I notice I'm starting to get really excited. Pretty much all of my underdog biases immediately start kicking in, and I'm thinking to myself, what if there really is no difference? What if they sound and feel exactly the same, and the only real difference is which headstock do you prefer? And what if my buddy, what if he also thinks the same way? And so when I get to his studio, I'm ready to go. We do a little small talk and then the cameras start rolling and he hands me his cherry red Les Paul Standard. And immediately I see this thing, I've seen it before, and I think to myself, this thing looks good. But once we plug them in, it's gonna be a completely different story, right? So we sit down, plug them into the amps and start playing. We begin with the Epiphone and my immediate thoughts are, okay, this thing sounds and feels really good. I guess all of those upgrades really did have an effect. And after I finished playing it, we swap out the guitars and he hands me the Standard. And as I'm strumming these first few chords, I'm just thinking to myself sitting there, okay, this thing actually does sound a bit better. Now take that with a grain of salt. There were a couple of variables that I didn't even think about in the moment, like one guitar was tuned a half step down, the pickup height might have been a little bit different, but even beyond those, like some of the smaller things in particular, it was very clear to me that this guitar did sound and feel a bit better than my Epiphone. Not to say that the Epiphone wasn't good. Both of us agreed that to our ears, the Epiphone was 80 or even 90% of the way there, but when A/B, that last 10 or 15% was a little bit noticeable, but in the grand scheme of things, that kind of made sense to me, right? You're talking about a guitar that is literally double the price of the Epiphone. To know that this guitar could still hold its own with the big boys, that was a very big deal. So I decided to just live my life and let it go. That was until one day in particular, this thought popped into my head. You put the Epiphone up against the Les Paul Standard, which is by no means the cheapest of the Gibsons. Come on, Mike, there's got to be a better way to do this. There has got to be a better matchup in mind, and that's when it hit me. You see, last year Gibson had come out with this line of guitars called the Les Paul Studio Sessions, which was a line with all of the modern specs, but one tier below that removed the word session, and we have the Les Paul Studios. And with it being just $300 more than the Epiphones, I started to wonder, really wonder, how much closer could these things actually get? Would it have the same exact outcome as the Standard, or this time, would we be led down a completely different path? Well, I kind of think it's time we find out. And with it being only $300 more than the Epiphones, that close on the price spectrum, I started to wonder, really wonder, how much of a difference actually would there be? So in order to properly start this, we must first meet our contestants and see what they're actually made of, because that in a lot of ways counts just as much as the sound. So in our right corner, we have our first competitor, the Epiphone, specifically the 60s version with the 60 slim taper neck, which will matter a lot in a second, but we'll get back to that. But it also does have the 12-inch radius, the 24 3/4 inch scale length, basically everything that you'd expect from a Les Paul. Now, in our other corner, this is where things get interesting because we have our challenger, the Les Paul Studio. Now, Challenger, in terms of specs, in a lot of ways is very similar to the Epiphone. 12-inch fretboard radius, 24 3/4-inch scale length, and a couple of others, but that's where we get to our first category, which is very important, simply the visuals. In terms of this, I think it's a complete wash because of the binding on the body, because the headstocks are now pretty similar. I think the Epiphone takes it visually by a wide margin. I've never necessarily loved the look of the Les Paul Studios. I think they've done it a lot better more recently with the studio sessions, especially this one and the one in the Tobacco Burst. But luckily for us, visuals, although important, are not the only thing that matters. We won't get to know the real deal Holyfield until we plug these things in and actually see what they can do. Okay, just going with what I'm familiar with. Royer, Custom Pro Reverb, see who wins this fight. So before we get to the actual sound of this guitar, there's one more thing that we have to address that is arguably just as important as the sound, maybe even more at times, and that's the actual playability. Which is where I'm really thankful that I went with the 60s Epiphone instead of the 59, because it does have a slimmer neck, which is a lot closer to the Les Paul Studio, not even knowing that I was going to do this project in the future. But if you're asking me specifically which guitar playability-wise I liked better straight out of the box, it was probably the Les Paul Studio. And let me explain what I mean by that, because on the surface, after just reading the spec sheet, both of them have some sort of slim taper neck. This one says 60 slim taper, and the Les Paul Studio says regular slim taper. So they might actually be the same exact thing, but the difference to me was in just playing them straight out of the box and reminding myself that even if they are exactly the same thing, sometimes little differences in fretwork can make a big difference in your overall playing experience. In my specific fingers, the combination of the fretwork and the neck just felt a little bit smoother on the Les Paul Studio. And this is where it gets really interesting, because unlike with the visuals, at least for me, I wouldn't necessarily call this a full point. And it really goes into who the individual player is, because there are guys who really like messing around with this sort of stuff who would probably say, save me the $300, I can figure out how to make that Epiphone feel just as good as the Gibson with a couple tricks that I may not know yet. But there are also a lot of players who just want a guitar to be absolutely 100% playable out of the box, 100% of the way that they like it. And for that type of person, probably more of where I'm coming from, that's why the Studio would probably be the winner. Of course, playability is just one part of playing, and we have to actually get to the sound and what these pickups can actually do. So starting with the Epiphone, I feel like one of the bigger selling points when it came to these guitars is that they started putting Gibson USA custom buckers in there. And figuring out the sound, especially a couple months ago when I was putting it up to the Les Paul standard and just seeing it in this room, was very valuable. But once we switched to the Studio, I feel like this is where things got a little bit more interesting. Because here's the deal, I spent a couple of days A-Bing these back and forth, but it was pretty casual and wasn't necessarily in a more controlled environment like I am in now. But playing them back to back and seeing these, the Burst Bucker Pros, which I believe are the same things as in the standard, there was actually less of a difference than I thought, because when I was first A-Bing it, I always liked this better. And I would still say I like this a little bit better. But there was also one other variable that I kept forgetting to take into account, and that's this guy right here. Technically, you are offering people more for that extra $300 that they're paying. But for a lot of people who want that really true to Les Paul thing, that could go from being a complete non sequitur to almost being a negative. But also going back to that true to Les Paul thing, if I was comparing both of these guitars to my Heritage or to a Les Paul Standard, that's not something I would really take that much into consideration. So that, again, much like the playability, I feel like is really going to be player to player. But I feel like we really won't understand the sound of these pickups and how they compare until we truly A/B them. So let's see what these things can do. Get to our final point, our moral of this story. If you were to ask me personally, based on now having played both of these guitars, which one would I pick? Me personally, can I get a drum roll, please? Okay, that's enough. I'm probably going with the Les Paul Studio. Now, this was really surprising to me because usually just knowing that they're pretty similar in sound, and the visuals from I think the Epiphone just looks a lot better, but the playability, I just like this neck more. I think a lot of people who know about setting up guitars, who know about pickup heights and changing the tone, would probably pick this one. Because with just a few small adjustments that they probably know how to do pretty easily, you're getting a better looking guitar with a hard-shelled case that has now a pretty cool Epiphone logo that matches all of the Gibsons. But for someone like me who wants something just out of the box that felt amazing, and it may just be this specific model, even though historically I've hated the way the Les Paul Studios looked, and I would probably rather get the Tobacco Burst than this one. It has nothing to do with the point I'm making, which is that I don't think it matters what I think. What matters is what you think. So from what I showed you in this video, from what you've tried in real life, what do you think? Please let me know. Do you think it would be better for you to get the most expensive Epiphone or the cheapest Gibson? Let me know in the comments, and please let me know your reasoning why, or if you think I'm wrong. But anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I found myself very interested in Les Pauls more recently, and in learning to love these guitars and learning the history behind them. I think it's also cool to learn like what they offer at different price ranges and what different people think. But if you want to know anything more about the Les Paul Studio, I got this one from the homies at Sweetwater. The links will be in the description. Make sure to check it out. One of the best ways to support the channel, if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the other gear that I use in this video, the amps, the pedals, heck, even the camera, make sure to check out those links. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, most important of all, have a fantastic night.